Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Canterbury Catholic, and I'm back after a bit of a break. In short, I won't bore you guys with the details, but I am a college student, and I also have a job. And so the spring, the past 2.5 months have been exceptionally busy for me. But now I'm on break, and so I might have some time to put out some more content. I just wanted to do a quick, just initial thoughts post viewing review and just a short ramble, 10-minute ramble concerning episode 2 of the trilogy, the short movie trilogy, Mass of the Ages, which is, if you've never seen it, never heard of it before, it's basically a docu-series. It's a trilogy, and episode 2 just came out, about the Latin Mass, about the Tridentine Rite. And episode 1 came out, I'm not sure, I think a year ago, roundabout. And then episode 2 was just released today. And I just finished watching it, the whole thing, and so I just wanted to give my initial thoughts. I don't know what the rules are in terms of having that video playing. Oops, sorry about that. Having that video playing on top of this one, as most kind of review videos tend to go. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to kind of talk about some things. So I think in general, I liked this installment better than the first one. The first one I felt was a little schizophrenic in its narrative. For those of you who have seen it, you know that it's kind of in two portions. One is kind of a theological and historical segment, and then the other half is more of an emotional segment. And I didn't like how it vacillated back and forth between one and the other. If I'm being honest, I felt like the emotional part of it was a little out of place. I feel like if they were going to play that card in terms of getting their message across concerning the Tridentine Rite and whatnot, that probably should have been some sort of supplemental content, or maybe even its own altogether, because you have this layperson's experience talking about her family, and that's how it opens, and then you go to the historical, theological side of things with these theologians and I would say armchair theologians, frankly, but these people, clerics and laity, giving historical and theological account for the liturgical reforms, and then it goes back to the first layperson's kind of emotional journey, and then when it comes back to the clergy, it's talking to them about their emotional journey, and it was just a bit much, and so I didn't quite like that. I think this installment was a little bit it did not have that as much. Actually, I wouldn't really say it had that at all, and if it did, it certainly was not as extreme. I think installment number 2, I guess it's called A Perfect Storm, was better at kind of staying the course and telling things in a way that made sense. I'm also trying not to spoil anything or not, so if you haven't seen it, go watch it. But so I'll give it that. I think I didn't get as much whiplash watching this installment as I did in the first one. I will say this particular installment focuses on like I said, the history and the theology more. There's less emotional. There's a little bit of it, but it's a lot less intense or present. It really focuses chronologically on this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. With that, when you talk about the history of the liturgical reform, you're going to naturally, it happens all the time, you're going to hear the name Annibale Buonini. I won't go into who he was and what his role was. That's the whole point of this episode, of this installment of the docuseries, so you should go watch it. I do think that he was antagonized, and it's hard not to antagonize Bugnini, frankly, Archbishop Bugnini. And I'm not justifying anything that the Archbishop did, or his motives or his actions. Frankly, I'm not quite interested in that sort of thing. I think that tends to lead down the road of conspiracy theory. Even if you are very faithful to historical accuracy, it just inevitably leads down that road, and so I try to steer clear from it. Having said all that, like I said, not justifying anything with Bugnini, not, whatever. Like, it is essentially almost impossible to not blame him for some of the really bad things that happened. I will say there were some times where I felt like the antagonization, if that's a word, of Archbishop Bugnini was a bit much. I think the time that they, like, it's very obvious early on, like, okay, this is the bad guy and there are some shady things going on, but can we move past that? Like, let's talk less about laying all the blame at the foot of this now dead archbishop, and why don't we talk about some of the more practical, on the ground, boots on the ground things in terms of what happened following the Second Vatican Council, and some of the really bad liturgical reforms, and perhaps some of the responses to that, because they didn't really talk about the response of the people. They made it seem like, well, Vatican II happened, Sacrosanctum Concilium becomes the law of the land, that, runs amok, essentially, and everyone just bought into it. But obviously that's not the case, because this movie's being made. They even interview two very elderly women who talk about how from the beginning they did not buy it. So sorry if you can hear that. I live in an apartment, and so there are kids that play around this time of day. But yeah, so I felt like sometimes the blame was a bit, I don't want to say a bit much, because it's hard to say too much about the shady things that Archbishop Bugnini did and said. But I think they spent a little bit too much time on it. That's all I'll say on that. One thing I would commend them on is that sometimes when it comes to looking at the history and talking about Bugnini and some of the heavy hitters and the players with Vatican II and the implementation of the liturgical reform, people will tend to then shift that blame to Pope St. Paul VI, and they actually did not do that at all. They actually stuck to history and looked at the reality of what was going on, and acknowledged that a lot of this had nothing to do with St. Paul VI. And so I was very happy to see that. I don't have a personal, now I'll say this, I don't have a personal, like, very pious devotion to St. Paul VI. He's not someone who I tend to focus on when I do my daily devotions or look into the lives of the saints. I tend to go a little further back. But I will say it is frustrating as a young Catholic who is conservative, and I think traditional. I think all Catholics are traditional, but I call myself a traditional Catholic, or I consider myself one anyways. It is frustrating to run in those circles and almost inevitably have people talk about Pope St. Paul VI in a very negative way, and generally it leads to people questioning his canonization and his sainthood. They did not do this at all. I think they were very respectful towards Paul VI, and that I thoroughly appreciated. I'm trying to think. This was very off the cuff, as you can tell. I'm just I'm still processing a lot of it. One thing I will say, I talked about how the narrative and the flow of this episode was a lot less rocky than the first one. I will say one thing that was a little bit more schizophrenic, I think is a good way to kind of characterize it, was there were times where they'd start off with an interview with someone, and then they would have art and music come in and different video clips playing over it, and I felt like sometimes that was a bit much. Like, I think they could have spent more time focusing on who they were talking to, what that person was saying, and everyone they were interviewing was in, a good environment. Like, it was an appealing environment. Usually it was in their library or their living room or in, some sort of place. It wasn't bad to look at. So I think that sometimes that was a bit much in terms of having graphics interject the visual spectrum, and kind of disrupt my concentration in terms of what's being said, because then suddenly I'm looking at these images which sometimes have art and lettering on it, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on the images and the graphics rather than what's being said. And so sometimes that was difficult, and not, it kind of took away from the experience at times. The music was phenomenal, as it was in the last installment. I'm a music student. I study music education, and actually the very end of it, the closed. First of all, I've got to say the last 5 minutes leading into the credits and even through the credits, I think was a visual and was a kind of a visual masterpiece. Might be a bit much, because I'll call it a masterpiece. It was just very pretty. The footage they used, it actually emotionally touched me in a way, and I usually don't get touched that way in terms of videography and film, but I really felt I felt beauty. I felt peace just watching, whether it was clips of adoration, first communicants, confirmations, Eucharistic processions, processions and recessions, into and out of Mass, all while O Magnum Mysterium by Morten Lauridsen was playing. O Magnum Mysterium is a beautiful piece of music. Go ahead and listen to it. It's one of my favorite pieces of music, one of my favorite pieces of modern music, written by a pagan, no less. And so when I heard that, and just between one of my favorite pieces and the beautiful visuals that were going on, I commend the whole cast and crew of this installment, because that was actually, I think the last 5 minutes were my favorite part, just because it was just beautiful. It was just beauty and just the best that the Mass has to offer in terms of the visual beauty and the good and truth that comes out of seeing what's happening in the liturgy. I think it captured it very well. Well, that's a little bit more than 10 minutes, which is more than I wanted to go on with, but yeah, those are just my initial thoughts. I'll kind of call it here. Those are just my initial thoughts. And maybe I'll talk some more about it. Maybe there were some parts that I wanted to maybe go into depth, but I'm worried that if I don't want to make the time to put out a video with going through the movie and segmenting certain clips, if that's going to result in the video getting taken down. But there were some things I noticed. Some were that I think are praiseworthy, and then others that I would maybe criticize, or maybe want to just give my opinion on, because I think, I don't know, I just had some thoughts. But we'll see. We'll see how that goes. Maybe those will happen. Maybe they won't. But thank you guys for watching. I'm going to hopefully be able to do a little bit more. I do want to do more. I've seen that we've actually grown even in this long absence of me not putting out any content, which is very nice. I appreciate it. We're at 31 subscribers at the point of me filming this. If we can get 19 more subscribers, I can finally, YouTube will let me live stream, and I would love to do live streams, because I would much rather, oftentimes I just think about something and I'm like, oh, I want to talk about that, but I don't want to necessarily record and edit a video and then upload it. I'd rather just go live, talk about it, and be done with it. Another thing I really want to do is I've really gotten into saying the Divine Office, at least morning and evening prayer daily. And I've been doing that consistently basically for the past 6 months. And so I would love to be able to do that live, and maybe you could join, or watch. I've uploaded a video of me saying the Divine Office, but that's not quite the same. Watching it retroactively. So if we can get those 19 subscribers, we can do some live streams, and we can do some, live prayer, which I would really love to do. That's ultimately what I'd like to do. So anyways, that's been long enough. Hope you guys are doing well, and God bless. Bye.